Alright, so 3 months have passed since the last video and it's definitely time for an update. So beforehand I was working on some very specific features like the combat system and the quest system, and when those things were in a decently complete state, I could make some videos about them showing them off. But in recent months the development strategy has shifted quite a bit to something that's more about generally improving the game in all aspects. And while there are some clearly defined systems in the works, most notably the cutscene system, which is separate from the dialogue system I showed off last year, most of my time has been spent working on an enormous amount of smaller features, none of which necessarily deserve an entire video, but they are still very important to the overall experience. I'm going to graduate in a few months, and up until very recently I didn't know what I was gonna do after. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna need to have something to put in my CV, so I should probably take the content I already have, package it all up into a demo, and then show to companies and hopefully get hired somewhere. And hopefully get hired at a company that I think actually provides value to humanity, of which there aren't that many unfortunately. At least not in the gaming industry and not in Europe. I just don't want to be like 85 years old and have to look back at my life with deep regrets because I spent all of this time making mobile games and making the world a worse place by doing so. There's this whole debate going on about whether or not games are art, and my opinion is that, well, certainly all games contain art. They all contain textures, they all contain 3D models, that is art. But are the games still art when you take everything into account? And in my opinion, unfortunately, in many cases they are not. Oftentimes there are aspects to the game that just actively degrade it and take away from the artistic intent that is present in some parts. And when there are games like Dark Souls 1 and Ori, which became very fun games without having to sacrifice their artistic integrity, and which are basically entirely beneficial to those who play them, I'm just very strongly encouraged to do whatever is needed to maximize my chances of ending up at a company that I think actually contributes something to humanity. So that's a long-winded way of saying I've been working very hard on this demo, and only recently has this motivation turned into something a bit more healthy when I got accepted into a pretty good master degree. And I now have an additional 2 years to get this game into a pretty good state, after which I'll once again be in the same position as I was a few weeks ago, but at that point, the game will be in a pretty good state and I won't have to worry the same way that I had up until pretty recently. So enough about the motivation, and let's instead see what this motivation has actually produced. So right after I made the video about Sartoria, I got to work on making the first background tracks for the game. So I started with Where the Star Rose Leads, and then afterwards I made the music for the sheep level, which is now called the Ancest Plateau. Out of all of the games I've played, the Xenoblade series definitely has the best music. And in fact, the music in those games is so good that I think you really should just ignore all the problems that plague those games, because the experience of just running around in those beautiful and massive environments while listening to music that fits them perfectly, that's something you just don't get in any other game. So Xenoblade, and especially Xenoblade 2, is my biggest inspiration for the music in this game, but unfortunately my skill set when it comes to music does not really overlap with that which is necessary to make Xenoblade style music. So I'm a metal guitarist first and foremost, but I've also been making some pretty ambient guitar-based music for like 4 years at this point. It started with this album, and ever since I've been trying to refine and master the style. I'm basically trying to capture the essence of game music without using the conventions that are present in basically all game OSTs. But when doing anything that is new, there is the risk that what you're doing just won't work ever, regardless of how good you are. Some ideas are just fundamentally not good enough, or they are pretty good, but they're not suited for a particular context. Whether or not my music will work is a question that can only be answered by trying it out and seeing what it's going to be like when playing the game. I started with a song that is 13 minutes in length. All tracks will be at least 10 minutes in length, so the player won't go insane listening to short loops for hours on end. It is a massive workload on my part, but because I want my game to be art, I'm willing to sacrifice a bit of blood, sweat and tears for the sake of the experience. When I finally put the music into the game, I was happy to learn that it actually fit pretty well. If I have to point out one issue with the song, it's that the intensity and the emotion changes quite drastically throughout its duration, and I think that this will be distracting and perhaps not fit whatever the player is doing, because it's not dynamic music as in it responds to what the player is doing, but it's just a long song that has a lot of dynamics baked into it. So for the next OST, I try to reduce the dynamics a bit, while still maintaining the duration and the variety, and while still avoiding loops, and this time for 12 minutes straight. I don't like this song as much as the other one, but while listening to it for hours and hours while working on the game, it never felt too distracting to me, so I do think it solved the problems that the first song had. So 2 songs were completed, I had enough material to listen to and form opinions on how future music should be created, and then I moved on. One thing that I've been working on a lot throughout these months are various tools that are necessary to build a game like this. When I say tool, I actually mean tool in the traditional sense, like tools that all games since the 80s and 90s have been using internally. I already had a few Blender add-ons that I wrote to generate LODs, to export animations without the risk of corruption, and also to export all of the foliage data from Blender into Unity. This last one especially probably saves decades over doing it by hand, and that's why it was the first Blender add-on I wrote for this project. But since the last video, I've more than doubled the number of tools that I have on both the Blender side and the Unity side. On the Blender side, I now have tools for batch renaming things, creating LOD collections for things like roads and other objects that consist of many different parts, and I have various other add-ons like one for joining objects together based on distance. I have an entirely new workflow for rocks that allows me to place all of the rocks in a level as big as Sartoria in only 25 minutes, from scratch. I have tools for building all the prefabs in Unity in a single button press, and this is crucial for things like trees, which are made up out of several different components like the visual meshes, the collision, and also particle systems, and also the particle system shape, and the triggers, etc. Unity makes it very easy to write add-ons. For basically every step you would do in the editor by hand, there is a direct translation to an equivalent step in C#. On Blender, it's different. Blender exposes its API via Python, and the thing with this API is that it's very low level. In case you don't know, low level is a programming concept that means you're working with something with very fine-grained details. A high-level operation would be something like picking up an apple. The equivalent low-level operation would be firing neurons in your brain to tense up your muscles in such a way that the various cells that make up your body move towards another set of cells that we call the apple, etc, etc. A low-level API is great when you need to expand what Blender is truly capable of. It's great for add-on developers who can do really cool things with it, but in my case, I usually just want to automate a sequence of steps that I would otherwise be doing by hand. These are not trivial problems to solve in Blender. Things that are one-step operations in the UI, such as deactivating a collection or duplicating an object, can involve dozens of lines of code, including recursive function calls. And if you mess up, you might have desynchronized your Blender UI from what is happening under the hood. Up until very recently, the add-ons did all of this low-level stuff internally. Then I decided to just write a standard library that lets you call high-level functions that do exactly what you would otherwise be doing in the UI. Now that I've reworked most of my add-ons to use this library, all of them are much simpler, and I also extended many of them so that they can do more things. But here's the thing, the player won't directly see any of this. The game already had rocks before, so why should the player care that I have a new add-on to do it? Well, indirectly it does matter a lot actually. Now I can actually place rocks at a reasonable pace, and I can iterate much faster, resulting in higher quality environments and a world that is more fun to explore. This applies to all parts of the development process that involve an add-on. Development in general is now much faster and more fun than it was before, and all aspects of the game that rely on these add-ons will be of higher quality. So that's about the tools. It's a lot of code that the player won't directly see, but which is crucial to be able to make a game like this. Let's now discuss some actual features though. A few weeks ago I made a discovery about the way that animations are exported, and I realized that I don't actually need high detail meshes when exporting animations. This meant that exporting animations became way faster, allowing for longer animations to be exported as well, without slowing iteration down to a crawl. It finally became possible to make proper cutscene animations, and I quickly got to work. I'm going to make a video about this specific journey as part of a little series that goes into the technical details of a few systems. But for now, I'll just mention that this is a feature that I've been working on, and it'll be a very important part of the demo. The most productive or the most important part of these last few months has actually been the period from June 11th until now. I was making some short clips to post on my Instagram when I noticed that the skybox kind of ruined the entire view. Due to the technical nature of this problem, I knew that I had to make my own skybox. To solve the most immediate issue, which was that the distant terrain didn't blend in with the sky, I could use an existing solution. In the level where the star roads lead, I used an unlit material as the skybox, as that creates a perfect transition from the ocean into the fog color. This was the starting point for the new skybox. So now the terrain blends perfectly into an empty blue sky, so it's not quite what I want, but it's a starting point. The main issue with this is that the sky is supposed to have clouds in it, and with this approach there would be no clouds. So I thought, okay, maybe I can do 3D clouds. I can put a bunch of 3D clouds into the sky and hopefully it's going to look good. So I made some rough 3D clouds and I filled the entire sky with them, and there was a few million triangles. But what I saw was that, okay, maybe it actually has potential. It didn't look good yet, but I thought that, okay, maybe if I make this look a little bit better, if I work on the clouds and I work on the sky, maybe it's going to actually look at least as good as the previous one did, while also solving the issue of the previous skybox not being blended in with the terrain. So I did some more work, and then I realized, okay, These are 3D clouds, these are objects, I can move them around dynamically, and then I'm gonna have a dynamic skybox. When I implemented this, I thought, okay, this is certainly not perfect, but I like it more than how it was before. The next day, I solved the issue of the sky being monotonous by making my own shader for the skybox that uses a gradient that starts at the fog color and goes up to some arbitrary color, with a bunch of adjustable properties like where the horizon starts and ends. And I also added a star layer, which is something I couldn't have done before, but now it is actually possible. With any feature that I implement, it doesn't really matter how the first iteration looks. By building this skybox, I acquired the ability to make my own customizable sky with my own 3D clouds, which all move around over time, and most importantly, I have the freedom to tune it to be consistent with the art style. If a specific usage of this functionality doesn't look good, it doesn't mean that the feature is bad. Maybe the 3D clouds just aren't the right size or shape, or maybe there are too many of them, or there are too few of them, but what matters is that the feature exists, and it's something I can work with. The clouds are currently the second iteration, and I developed them specifically for Sartoria, which looks different from the Ansys Plateau, and I think that in the Ansys Plateau the clouds don't look very good, but that's okay. The important part is that the feature exists, and I have the freedom to do with it what I want, and I can make it look bad or good, and that's what really matters. The day after I did the sky, I looked at the water and thought, okay, this looks horrible. Up until now I was using a water shader that I copied from a tutorial, and the water shader is fine, but my art style is very different from what the video was going for, so it was kind of just incompatible with what my game had become. With the knowledge I had obtained from the sky, I built an entirely new water shader from scratch. This new water shader looks much better to my eyes, and while it will obviously undergo many changes in the future, it's important that the shader now exists and I understand how it works, and if I decide that there's an issue with it, I can fix it. There has been one long-standing graphical flaw that has plagued the game for the longest time. When I started out, the game was low poly, it used solid colors for almost everything, and I received many insults and the game received many comparisons to Roblox. Over time, I've been gradually starting to use more and more realistic textures for various materials. I learned that rocks and rock walls basically always look better this way, and buildings absolutely need them for the lighting to make them look presentable. While this did make the game look better overall, it also caused a new problem to emerge due to the many objects in the game that still used the simple colors. All trees and most small objects use a small color palette texture where each face is mapped to just one pixel of the texture. This approach allows me to build objects really fast, but stylistically I've also just failed at making or finding realistic textures that fit things like the trees. One thing that I remember from playing The Witness is that even though the game seems to have a lot of solid colors, the same way that my game does, they actually use a noise texture that they put onto basically every object in the game. When I did this myself, the result was an immediate improvement to visual quality, especially related to the shading and visual cohesion. I need to once again repeat that when I implement a new feature, the point is not exactly how the first iteration looks, but rather that the feature exists. The noise that is currently applied to these objects is the first attempt that I did, and it's done via what is probably a very inefficient shader graph node that has a few noise layers, and it's not properly scaled for most objects, but the point is that applying this noise texture is now possible, and even this first iteration, which is very rough, already makes things look way better in my opinion. I've made various other shaders as well, but an important one is the one that I use for rock faces. When a texture is scaled very small, there is a lot of repetition that is visible from a distance. This is very noticeable in Dark Souls 2, where many areas were originally supposed to be very dark, but then they downgraded the lighting and made everything really bright, and those areas became visible, and what you see in game now is textures that tile horribly. The same problem emerges with rock walls. You're gonna get very close to rock walls, so you probably have to scale them in such a way that the texture doesn't look very blurry, but then when you get very far away, you see horrible tiling all across the level. Previously, I kinda tried to find a middle ground between something that looks pretty sharp when viewed from up close and something that doesn't look that bad when viewed from afar. But there really is no perfect middle ground. I'm now addressing the issue with the shader that makes it so that when you view something from afar, it displays a very large texture, but when you get up close, it gradually starts blending in the smaller version of the texture. If this transition is noticeable, it'll obviously be a problem, but so far I think it's alright. I also added dithering to most objects in the game. I generally hate how dithering looks in games, especially in games like Mario Odyssey, Donkey Kong Bonanza, and Monster Hunter Wilds, but it's a genuinely useful technique that can be tuned to minimize the issues it causes, while still serving its proper gameplay purpose of not requiring the camera to be blocked by most objects, which is very important in a game where I have no control over how the player turns the camera. And from a little playtest that I did, it seems that some people aren't yet familiar with using a camera in 3D, and they will just run around and the camera is going to clip through everything. With dithering, this playstyle is now supported officially, and it's not as bad as it was before. A common complaint I receive is that the game looks too bright. And the thing is, I agree. but let me explain why the game currently looks the way that it does. When I started out, the lighting was very dark. The color of the texture was basically what ended up on the screen. If I wanted an object to be white, I would just map the face of these objects to a pure white pixel on the color palette texture, and it would look fine. But over time I began to realize that brightness tends to make the game look and feel better. But here I'm making a very important distinction between objective observations, such as that a particular brightness could maybe cause discomfort or even headaches, or that bloom misbehaves when textures are too bright, and the purely subjective feeling that I get when I look at an image. For the last few months, I've been chasing this subjective feeling, while basically ignoring the objective issues that this caused. The thing is that the subjective feeling I had always drew me closer and closer to a very bright image, where everything is very saturated and high contrast. As I was working on the game, I was continuously making new post-processing filters, and I was setting up new lighting configurations that always made everything brighter and brighter. But remember that the objects themselves were still maps to colors based on how they look in dark scenes. So when I made a tree and the leaves had to be white, I mapped them to the white color, and likewise for all other objects and all other colors. The result is that there was a clash between the new lighting and post-processing and the way that my objects were textured. I needed the sky to be bright, and I needed bloom to make the brightness convincing. But this same bloom was now interpreting regular objects as being as bright as the sun and responding accordingly. So the post-processing and lighting became brighter and brighter. It did cause technical issues, but the solution was not to globally turn the brightness back down. Instead, I just had to go through the color palette texture and manually tone down the brightness on some of the problematic pixels while keeping all the other ones intact. And the result is now that perceptually the game looks the same, but you are no longer being blinded as if you're looking into the sun when you're really just looking at an apple. Do keep in mind that I've only spent one session on this, and I only did it in one level and only for some objects. This means that the objects in the other two levels only received these adjustments by accident. I haven't yet gone over all the objects in those levels, so there are still many objects that are probably going to blind you. Again, the point is that I don't need to change the post-processing. I can maintain the vibe that I want, and objects that respond poorly to it, they can be tweaked independently. I have of course worked on many other aspects of the visuals, including atomic post-processing and time of day configurations, which I can swap between at runtime via a button press. I've added cloth physics to the player character, which eliminates all clipping problems that were present before, and I've also worked on animations across the board, so hopefully you'll notice at least some difference. Anyway, with all these graphical changes implemented, I'm finally happy with how the game looks. I like how bright it is, and this subjective feeling is no longer conflicting with the color of individual objects, at least for objects that I've actually addressed and fixed. Importantly, my workflow when it comes to making objects remains unchanged, so I can continue to make objects at a rapid pace and make a game that has large maps with a great variety of objects in each. And even if you personally think that the game looked better before, at least now I have the ability to shape the visuals how I actually want. If there is something you don't like about the visuals, it's either a personal opinion that differs from mine, or it is a visual flaw that I can fix. I now have proper control over how the game looks, and this makes it the biggest development since I learned about baked lighting well over a year ago at this point. There are also many gameplay changes. The most important one is that the player character now jumps higher. The idea here was that in my game it's very easy to do combo jumps. It's much easier than in any Mario game, and you also have more flexibility with where you jump when you're in the middle of a combo. The idea was then, okay, so you can very easily combo jump. How about I encourage you to use this feature by making your base jump into a little hop? From a design perspective this might make sense, but in practice, a jump is a jump. And if I have an object in front of me that doesn't look that tall, then I think one button press on the jump button should get me there. And when you're running up a slope, previously a jump didn't really do much. You would have to do a combo jump just to get up into a very small object that was put onto the slope. Well, the player now jumps higher, and I made the gravity stronger to compensate. The game feels faster, you have more control and more freedom, but the combo system still makes sense, and I think that the change is a net positive all around. I'll soon continue working on the cutscene system, the NPC and dialogue system, the combat system, and various other systems that are going to tie all of these things together. I'll make videos for each of these, of course. I'll also continue working on addressing the list of to-dos that expands every single day at a worrying pace. But I'm convinced that in a few months' time, I'll have a version of this game ready that will reflect what I'm trying so incredibly hard to create. Thank you all for watching, and see you in the next one.